Katie had been at the Alliance base for a week when the first big attack happened. She was helping in the medical bay when alarms started ringing and soldiers began running to their positions. Through the windows, she could see explosions in the distance and flying vehicles shooting at each other in the orange sky. Colonel Tylak's voice came over the communication system. All personnel to defensive positions. Korthak ground forces approaching from the east. Medical teams prepare for casualties. Katie stayed with the medical team as wounded soldiers were brought in. She watched the alien doctors work on injuries and learned how to help by bringing supplies and holding equipment. The wounded soldiers were mostly Varakti and Zelthans, with a few Noxari who breathed gas and had to be treated in special chambers. One young Zelthan soldier had been hurt badly and was making sad singing sounds that meant he was in pain. The doctor said they needed a rare plant that only grew in the deep swamp to make medicine for him. But the swamp was now controlled by Korthak forces and too dangerous to reach. "I could go get it," Katie said quietly. The doctor looked at her, with his crystal eyes glowing. "Human child, that area is filled with enemy soldiers and the most dangerous creatures on this planet. Even our best warriors cannot survive there without heavy equipment. But I've been in those swamps before when the Zelthans found me. I can move through them without breathing equipment or gravity suits. Maybe the enemies won't expect a small human." Colonel Tylak had been listening to the conversation. He walked over and looked down at Katie with his yellow reptile eyes. "This is absolutely too dangerous. You are just a child and a civilian. But he'll die if someone doesn't get that plant soon, right?" The colonel was quiet for a long moment. Around them, other wounded soldiers were being treated, and some were making sounds of pain. Finally, he spoke. "If you were to attempt this mission, you would need to be accompanied by one of our soldiers. Sir, with respect, any soldier you send will need equipment that makes noise and slows them down. Katie has already proven she can survive in conditions that kill other species." The medical officer spoke up. "We have lost 3 scouting teams trying to gather medical supplies from that region." Katie felt scared, but also determined. She had been useless since arriving at the base while soldiers risked their lives to protect everyone. Maybe this was something she could do to help. "I know where the plant grows. The Zelthans showed me on our way here. I can be there and back before anyone knows I'm gone." Colonel Tylak studied her carefully. "You understand that if you are caught by Korthak soldiers, they will kill you without mercy. They do not take prisoners, especially not humans." "I understand, sir." 2 hours later, Katie was walking through the swamp alone, carrying a small pack with food and water. She wore dark clothes that would blend with the shadows and moved carefully to avoid making noise. The alien base had grown quiet behind her as she entered the dangerous territory. The swamp at night was full of sounds from creatures she could not see. Things moved in the water and flew overhead, but none of them bothered her. She was beginning to understand that most of the wildlife on Xerion Prime saw her as something that did not belong in their food chain. She found the area where the healing plants grew near a pool of steaming water. The plants had thick green leaves with silver spots that glowed faintly in the darkness. She carefully picked enough for several doses of medicine and packed them in her bag. On the way back, she heard voices speaking in a harsh language she did not recognize. She hid behind a large tree and saw 4 Korthak soldiers walking through the swamp. They were tall creatures with black skin and red eyes that glowed in the dark. They carried weapons that looked like they could cut through metal. Katie waited until they passed, then continued toward the base. But more Korthak soldiers appeared ahead of her, blocking her path. She realized they were surrounding the Alliance base, preparing for another attack. She counted at least 20 enemies moving through positions where they could attack the base from multiple directions. The Alliance soldiers inside did not know. They were coming and would be caught by surprise. Katie had to make a choice. She could try to sneak around the enemies and get back to the base safely with the medicine. Or she could try to warn the base about the attack even though it meant risking capture. She thought about the wounded Zelthan soldier who needed the medicine and all the other soldiers in the base who were counting on being safe behind their defenses. Then she made her decision. Katie climbed up into one of the tall trees where she could see the whole area. She took out the emergency communication device from her pack and set it to the Alliance frequency. "This is Katie Williams calling Alliance base. Enemy forces surrounding your position. At least 20 soldiers in attack positions on all sides. Repeat, Korthak forces preparing surprise attack." Colonel Talak's voice came back immediately. "Katie, where are you? Return to base immediately." "I can't, sir. They're between me and the base. But I have the medicine for the wounded soldier." "Forget the medicine. Find somewhere safe to hide until we deal with these enemies." But Katie was already moving. She had noticed something the Korthak soldiers did not know about. There was an old drainage tunnel that led from the swamp directly under the base. If she could reach it, she could get inside and deliver the medicine while also giving the Alliance soldiers information about enemy positions. She climbed down from the tree and began moving carefully toward the tunnel entrance. The Korthak soldiers were focused on the base and did not notice one small human moving through the shadows below them. The tunnel was dark and filled with water up to her knees, but Katie pushed forward. She could hear fighting starting above her as the Alliance soldiers responded to her warning about the attack. Explosions shook dirt down from the tunnel ceiling, but she kept moving. She reached the tunnel exit inside the base just as the battle became intense. Alliance soldiers were firing from defensive positions while Korthak forces attacked from the surrounding area. Katie ran to the medical bay with the healing plants. The Zelthan doctor took the plants and immediately began preparing medicine for the wounded soldier. "Human child, you have saved his life. But how did you get past all those enemies?" "I found another way in. But Colonel Talak needs to know there are more enemies than we thought, and they know exactly where our weak points are." Katie spent the next hour helping the colonel plan the defense of the base. She drew maps showing where she had seen enemy soldiers and suggested ways to attack them from directions they would not expect. "You have given us a significant advantage, Katie. Because of your warning, we were ready for their attack instead of being surprised." The battle continued for several more hours, but the Alliance forces won because they had been prepared. When morning came, the Korthak forces retreated deeper into the swamp, leaving behind their wounded and dead. Colonel Talak called Katie to his office after the fighting ended. "What you did last night was very brave but also very dangerous. You disobeyed direct orders to stay safe." "I'm sorry, sir. I just wanted to help." "You did help. You probably saved many lives with your actions. But Katie, you are still a child, and this is a war zone. I cannot allow you to take such risks again." Katie nodded, but she was already thinking about other ways she might be able to help the Alliance forces. She was starting to understand that being human gave her abilities that could make a real difference in this war, even if she was just 12 years old. That night, as she tried to sleep, she could hear the adults talking about the human child who walks through death like it was a garden. She did not feel brave or special, but she was beginning to realize that maybe humans were more dangerous than other species thought. Katie Williams pressed her face against the thick glass window and watched the stars drift by like tiny diamonds scattered across black silk. The ship was huge and filled with aliens she had only seen in books before this trip. Her father, Marcus, worked as a diplomat for Earth and had brought her along to see how humans and aliens worked together in space. The ship was called Starbound Unity, and it belonged to many different alien races who were friends with Earth. Katie had spent 3 days exploring its long hallways and meeting creatures that looked like walking lizards, others made of crystal that sang when they talked, and some that breathed gas instead of air like humans did. She was in the observation deck eating lunch when the lights suddenly turned red and a loud alarm started making noise throughout the ship. Katie dropped her sandwich and looked around, as alien crew members began running in different directions. The lizard-like Varakti soldiers moved fast on their strong legs, while the crystal Zelthans made worried singing sounds. A voice spoke over the ship's communication system in the common language that all space travelers used. All crew to battle. Stations. Enemy ships detected. This is not a drill. Katie felt scared but also excited. Her father had told her that space could be dangerous, but she had never seen a real space battle before. She stayed by the window hoping to see the enemy ships, but all she could see were distant flashes of light. The ship shook hard and Katie fell to the floor. The lights went out for a moment, then came back on, but they kept flashing red. More alien voices filled the halls, speaking in languages she did not understand, but their tone made it clear that something bad was happening. A tall Varakti officer with dark green scales ran into the observation deck. His yellow eyes looked around quickly until they found Katie sitting on the floor. "Human child, you must come with me now. Your father sent me to take you to the escape pods." Katie stood up, but her legs felt weak from fear. "What's happening? Where is my father?" "The Korthak insurgents are attacking us. Your father is with the other diplomats in a different part of the ship. I must get you to safety first." The alien held out his clawed hand to help her walk faster. They ran through corridors filled with smoke and the sound of alarms. Other crew members were helping civilians move toward different parts of the ship. Katie saw families of different alien species holding their young ones close as they hurried along. The ship shook again, and this time the lights went out completely. Emergency lighting came on, making everything look orange and scary. Katie could hear the sound of metal breaking somewhere in the ship and voices calling for help. "Hurry, human child, we are almost there." The Varakti officer pulled her along as they climbed down a ladder to a lower level of the ship. Katie's heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. They reached a section with many small pod-shaped vehicles attached to the wall. Other civilians were already climbing into them with the help of crew members. Katie saw that each pod was meant for only a few people. "Get in this one." The officer pointed to a pod near the end of the row. "It will take you to the nearest safe. Plan it automatically. Do not worry, the system knows where to go." Katie climbed into the small pod, but turned back to look at the officer. "What about my father? What about you?" "We will follow in other pods. The ship's computer will send you all to the same place. Now strap yourself in quickly." Katie sat in the single seat and pulled the safety straps over her shoulders like the officer showed her. The inside of the pod was simple with just a few lights and buttons. There was a small screen that showed a map of nearby star systems. The officer sealed the pod door, and Katie heard mechanical sounds as the pod prepared to launch. Through the small window, she could see him helping other people into their pods. The ship shook violently again, and she heard the terrible sound of metal being torn apart. Suddenly, her pod shot forward like a rocket, and Katie was pushed back into her seat by the force. Through the window, she could see the big ship getting smaller behind her as her pod flew away from it. Flashes of light around the ship showed that the battle was still happening. The pod's computer spoke to her in a calm voice. Destination set for Zarian Prime. Travel time 4 hours. Emergency supplies located under your seat. Remain calm and stay strapped in. Katie tried to stay brave, but tears started running down her face. She was alone in a tiny ship flying through space toward a planet she had never heard of. She did not know if her father was safe, or if he had made it to his own escape pod. She looked at the screen showing her path to Zarian Prime and noticed red warnings appearing around the planet's symbol. The computer voice spoke again, but this time it sounded different. Warning system malfunction detected. Navigation error. Unable to correct course. Katie felt the pod start to shake and spin. The lights inside flickered on and off. She could see through the window that she was falling toward a planet that looked brown and orange with swirling clouds. It did not look like the blue and green planets she had seen in school pictures. Emergency landing protocol activated. Brace for impact. The computer voice was breaking up with static now. Katie held tight to her seat straps and closed her eyes as the pod fell faster toward the strange planet below. She could hear the pod's outer shell getting hot as it fell through the atmosphere. The shaking got worse and worse until she felt like her teeth might fall out. Then everything went black and quiet. Katie's last thought before she lost consciousness was wondering if anyone would ever find her on this unknown world, and if she would ever see her father again. The pod crashed into the surface of Zarian Prime with Katie inside completely alone and far from any help she knew about. Katie woke up with her head hurting and the taste of blood in her mouth. The escape pod was tilted sideways and filled with smoke that made her cough. She could hear strange sounds outside like animals calling to each other, but much louder and scarier than any animals she knew from Earth. She pushed the emergency release button and the pod door opened with a hiss. Hot air rushed in that smelled like sulfur and rotting plants. Katie climbed out carefully because her left arm hurt, and she felt dizzy. The pod had crashed in a swampy area with tall trees that had red leaves and thick gray trunks. The ground was soft and muddy under her feet. In the distance, she could see mountains with smoke or steam rising from them. The sky was an orange color she had never seen before, and there were 2 suns shining down, making everything very hot. Katie looked back at the pod and saw that most of it was broken and twisted from the crash. The computer screen was cracked and showing no lights. She realized that no one would be able to track her location now, and she was completely alone on this strange planet. Her stomach hurt from hunger, so she checked under the seat like the computer had told her. There was a small pack with food bars that tasted like cardboard and bottles of water. There was also a basic medical kit and a device that looked like a flashlight but had other buttons on it. She ate one of the food bars and drank some water, while trying to think about what to do next. Her father had taught her some basic survival skills during their camping trips on Earth, and she tried to remember what he had said about being lost in the wilderness. Find shelter first, then look for water and food. Stay in one place if you think people are looking for you. But if not, then try to find other people. She said the words out loud to make herself feel less scared. Katie decided to stay near the pod for a while in case rescue ships came looking for her. She used pieces of the broken pod to make a small shelter that would keep the rain off if the orange clouds above started to drop water. On her second day alone, she saw her first aliens from this planet. They were tall and thin with silver skin that reflected light like mirrors. They moved through the swamp on long legs that did not sink into the mud like her feet did. When they saw her, they stopped and made clicking sounds to each other. One of them approached slowly and spoke in the common space language she knew. Small being, you are not from this world. How do you live in this heavy air without breathing equipment? Katie looked down at herself and realized she was breathing normally while these aliens were wearing masks over their faces. I don't know. I'm human from Earth. My pod crashed here 2 days ago. The alien made more clicking sounds that might have been surprise. Human from the Deathworld. We are Zelthons from the mining colony. Our equipment shows that the air here has poison that kills most species quickly. You should be dead already. I feel fine except my arm hurts from the crash. Are there other people around here? I'm looking for my father. The Zelthon talked to the others in their own language for a moment. No other humans have been found, but there are Alliance soldiers fighting the Korthak insurgents in this region. Perhaps they can help you. Katie felt hope for the first time since the crash. Can you take me to them? The journey is dangerous. There are creatures that hunt in these swamps, and the Korthak patrol this area looking for Alliance soldiers to kill. Also, the path goes through terrain that would crush most beings from the gravity. I can try. I'm stronger than I look. The Zelthons agreed to guide her, but warned that they would have to move slowly because of the difficult conditions. Katie packed her supplies and followed them as they began walking through the swamp toward higher ground. She quickly learned that what the aliens considered difficult walking was actually easier than some hiking she had done with her father. The heavy gravity that made the Zelthons move carefully felt only slightly heavier than normal to her. The thick air that required them to use breathing equipment was just hot and humid to her like a summer day back home. After several hours of walking, they reached a rocky area where the Zelthons said they needed to rest. Katie was tired but not exhausted like her companions who were breathing hard even with their equipment. Human child, how are you not affected by these conditions? Our people are much larger and stronger than you, but you move through this environment like it does not bother you at all. Katie thought about it while she shared some of her water with the aliens. Maybe because I'm from Earth, and we're used to different conditions. My father told me Earth is considered a dangerous planet by most space travelers. That night they camped in a cave to hide from the creatures that hunted in the darkness. Katie could hear them moving around outside, making sounds like nothing she had ever heard before. The Zelthons were very afraid and kept their weapons ready, but Katie found that she could sleep despite the noise. In the morning, they continued toward the Alliance base. The Zelthons pointed out dangerous plants and animals along the way, but Katie noticed that most of them seemed to avoid her. When she asked about this, one of the aliens said that predators on Zerion Prime usually only attacked beings they sensed as weak or sick. You may smell wrong to them because you are from a different world, or perhaps they sense that you are dangerous in your own way. Katie did not feel dangerous, but she was starting to understand that being human gave her advantages on this planet that other species did not have. She could breathe the air that poisoned them. She could walk easily in gravity that exhausted them. She could sleep while scary predators moved around outside. On the third day of walking, they finally reached the Alliance outpost. It was built into the side of a cliff and surrounded by energy barriers that kept the local wildlife away. Soldiers from several different species were posted as guards, and they looked surprised to see a human child walking with the Zelthons. The base commander was a Varakti officer named Colonel Vex Talak, who had dark green scales and intelligent, yellow eyes. He listened carefully as the Zelthons explained how they had found Katie and how she had survived alone on Zerion Prime for days without any protection. This is remarkable, human child. Most beings cannot survive even 1 day on this planet without full environmental suits. You have been breathing the toxic atmosphere and walking in crushing gravity as if they were normal conditions. Katie stood straight and tried to look brave, even though she was still scared and worried about her father. "Sir, I'm looking for other humans who might have crashed here. My father, Marcus Williams, was on the Starbound Unity when it was attacked." Colonel Talak made notes on a data pad and nodded. "We will check our records for other escape pods from that ship. In the meantime, you will stay here where it is safe. This planet is very dangerous, especially for civilians." But Katie was beginning to realize that Xerion Prime might be dangerous for most species, but it was not as dangerous for humans as everyone thought. 3 weeks after the night battle, Katie was officially assigned to the intelligence unit of the Alliance base. Colonel Tylak had decided that since she was going to help with dangerous missions anyway, it was better to make it official and give her proper training. Lieutenant Zara Keth became her partner and teacher. Zara was a young Noxari who breathed gas instead of air and had to wear a special suit when working with other species. She was smart and brave and treated Katie like a real soldier instead of just a lost child. The first rule of intelligence work is to observe everything and remember what you see, Zara explained as they studied maps of the surrounding area. The second rule is to never take unnecessary risks. Dead agents cannot report what they learned. Katie learned how to read enemy movement patterns and identify different types of Korthak weapons and vehicles. She practiced moving silently through different types of terrain and learned basic codes for sending secret messages. But what made her most valuable was still her ability to go places other Alliance soldiers could not reach. While they needed heavy equipment to survive on Xerion Prime, she could move freely through areas that would kill most species within hours. Admiral Jorak Thranks arrived at the base during Katie's 4th week there. He was the overall commander of Alliance forces in this region and had come to see the human child everyone was talking about. Katie was nervous about meeting such an important officer, but Colonel Talak told her to just be honest and answer his questions. The Admiral was a Zelthan whose crystal body was larger and more colorful than the others Katie had met. When he spoke, his voice made musical sounds that were somehow also very commanding. "So you are the young human who has been causing so much discussion among my officers?" Admiral Thranks studied her with eyes that sparkled like diamonds. "Tell me, Katie Williams, what do you think is the biggest problem we face in fighting the Korthak insurgents?" Katie thought carefully before answering. "Sir, I think the biggest problem is that we fight like other species instead of using what makes us different. The Korthak expect us to need equipment and support that limits where we can go and how fast we can move." "Interesting. And what would you suggest we do differently?" "Use small teams that can move quickly through terrain the enemies think is impossible. Hit them where they don't expect attacks and disappear before they can respond." The Admiral made notes on his data pad. "You speak like someone with military training. Where did you learn these ideas?" "From watching how the Korthak fight, sir. They use the planet against us because they think we're all the same. But humans are different from other Alliance species." Admiral Thranks spent the next hour asking Katie questions about terrain tactics and enemy behavior patterns. She answered based on her observations during scouting missions and what she had learned from studying intelligence reports. When the meeting ended, the Admiral spoke privately with Colonel Talak. Katie could not hear what they said, but she saw both officers looking at her several times during their conversation. The next morning, Katie was called to the briefing room where senior officers were planning a major operation. A Korthak supply convoy was traveling through territory that Alliance forces could not reach with conventional tactics. The route went through areas of toxic gas, heavy gravity, and dangerous wildlife. This mission requires someone who can move through hostile terrain without protective equipment and perform reconnaissance without being detected. Colonel Tylak looked directly at Katie. The information we gather will determine whether we can intercept this convoy and capture supplies we desperately need. Katie felt excited and scared at the same time. This was a real military mission, not just helping around the base or making emergency runs for medical supplies. Lieutenant Zara would accompany her to handle communications and provide backup support. They would have 3 days to locate the convoy, determine its exact route, and identify weak points for an ambush. The mission area was a volcanic region where most species could not survive even with full environmental protection. Hot gases rose from cracks in the ground, and the temperature was high enough to damage standard equipment. Katie and Zara had to travel light and move fast. On the first day, they crossed terrain that would have been impossible for larger teams. Katie could walk normally, while Zara had to use special equipment that slowed her down. But the Noxari officer was experienced and helped Katie learn advanced reconnaissance techniques. They found the Korthak convoy on the second day. It was larger than intelligence reports had indicated, with heavy weapons and more guards than expected. Katie counted the vehicles and soldiers while Zara recorded their communications frequencies and movement patterns. "This is going to be much harder than planned," Zara whispered as they watched from a hidden position. "There are at least 50 enemy soldiers with that convoy, and they have anti-aircraft weapons that could stop our attack ships." Katie studied the convoy route and noticed something important. "Look at how they're traveling. They stay on the main path because their vehicles can't handle rough terrain. But there's a narrow canyon about 10 kilometers ahead where they'll have to slow down and spread out." "You're right. That would be perfect for an ambush if we could get our forces there in time. But getting Alliance troops to the canyon would require them to cross the same type of dangerous terrain Katie and Zara had just traveled through. Most soldiers would need so much protective equipment they could never move fast enough." Katie had an idea that seemed crazy but might work. "What if we don't try to get our troops there? What if we stop the convoy ourselves?" Zara's eyes went wide behind her breathing mask. "Katie, we're just 2 people and they have 50 soldiers plus armored vehicles. But they're not expecting any kind of attack in this area. Everyone knows it's too dangerous for Alliance forces to operate here. If we could disable their lead vehicles in that canyon, they'd be trapped until our reinforcements arrive." Katie explained her plan while Zara listened carefully. It was risky and required perfect timing, but it could work. The key was using the terrain against the enemies instead of trying to fight them directly. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Katie would position herself at the narrow point of the canyon with explosive charges, while Zara coordinated from a safe distance. When the convoy entered the trap, they would block both ends and call for Alliance forces to finish the job. The plan worked better than expected. Katie was able to plant the charges without being detected, and when the convoy entered the canyon, she triggered an explosion that blocked their escape route. The Korthak soldiers found themselves trapped in a space too narrow for their vehicles to maneuver. Alliance attack ships arrived within an hour and captured the entire convoy, along with valuable supplies and intelligence. It was one of the biggest victories in the sector, and Katie had played a major role in making it happen. Admiral Thranks called her to his temporary headquarters after the mission. "Katie Williams, what you accomplished yesterday was exceptional military work. You planned and executed an operation that experienced officers said was impossible." "Thank you, sir. But Lieutenant Zara did most of the technical work. Leadership is about seeing opportunities others miss and having the courage to act on them. You have shown both qualities." The Admiral paused and looked at his data pad. "I am recommending you for official military rank and assignment to my strategic planning staff." Katie could not believe what she was hearing. "Sir, I'm only 12 years old." Age is less important than capability in wartime. You have proven yourself more valuable than officers with years of training and experience. 2 days later, Katie Williams became the youngest commissioned officer in galactic history with the rank of Lieutenant Junior grade. But more importantly, she had found her place in the war against the Korthak insurgents and discovered abilities she never knew she had. The final battle for Xerion Prime began 6 weeks after Katie received her commission as Lieutenant Junior grade. Intelligence reports showed that the Korthak insurgents had built their main headquarters inside an underground fortress deep beneath the planet's largest volcano. The facility was considered impossible to attack because of the extreme conditions surrounding it. Admiral Thranks called a meeting of all senior officers to discuss the situation. The fortress was protected by layers of toxic gases, lethal temperatures, and crushing gravity that made conventional assault impossible. Even their most advanced environmental suits could not protect soldiers in that environment for more than a few minutes. We have tried orbital bombardment, but their shields are too strong and the facility is too deep underground. The Admiral's crystal form glowed with frustration. We have tried sending unmanned probes, but the conditions destroy all our equipment before it can gather useful intelligence. Katie sat quietly in the back of the room listening to the debate. The other officers discussed various attack plans, but each one had problems that seemed impossible to solve. Finally, Admiral Thranks noticed her and asked for her opinion. "Sir, I think we're approaching this wrong. Everyone keeps trying to figure out how to protect our soldiers from the environment. But what if we used soldiers who don't need protection?" Colonel Tylak leaned forward with interest. "What do you mean, Katie? Humans can survive in conditions that kill other species. I've proven that over and over since I got here. Maybe instead of trying to overcome the environment, we should use it as our advantage." The room became very quiet as the officers thought about this idea. Lieutenant Zara was the first to speak. "Katie, you're suggesting that you personally lead an assault team into that fortress. Not just me. There are other humans in the Alliance forces. Sergeant Alex Turner arrived with the reinforcement fleet last week. Between the two of us, we could scout the facility and find weak points for the main attack." Admiral Thranks studied the tactical displays showing the fortress location. Even if humans can survive the environmental conditions, the fortress itself is heavily defended with automated weapons and hundreds of enemy soldiers. That's why it needs to be a small team that can move fast and stay hidden. A large assault would be detected immediately, but 2 people might be able to get inside unnoticed. The debate continued for several hours. Many officers thought the plan was too dangerous and that Katie was too young for such an important mission. But others pointed out that conventional tactics had failed repeatedly and that desperate times required desperate measures. Finally, Admiral Thranks made his decision. "Katie Williams, you will lead a reconnaissance mission to gather intelligence about the fortress defenses. Sergeant Turner will accompany you as backup. But this is strictly a scouting operation, not an assault." Katie nodded, but she was already thinking beyond just gathering information. If she could get inside the fortress, there might be opportunities to cause damage from within. The journey to the volcanic fortress took 2 days through terrain that was deadly to most life forms. Katie and Sergeant Turner traveled light, carrying only essential equipment and supplies. Alex Turner was an experienced soldier who had fought in several campaigns, but even he was impressed by how easily Katie moved through the hostile environment. "I've heard stories about you from the other troops, but seeing it in person is something else." Turner checked his equipment readings as they climbed toward the fortress. "The radiation levels here would kill most people in minutes, but you're not even breathing hard. I guess Earth prepared me for places like this. What's it like fighting with regular human troops?" "Different from what I expected. Most alien species think of humans as weak because we're smaller than them, but we're faster and more adaptable than they realize. They reached the outer perimeter of the fortress on the morning of the second day. The entrance was hidden inside a cave system that led deep into the volcanic rock. Automated defense systems guarded the approaches, but Katie noticed they were designed to detect large groups or vehicles, not individual infiltrators. She and Turner spent several hours studying the defenses and mapping the cave entrances. The fortress was bigger than intelligence reports had indicated, with multiple levels extending far underground. Getting inside would require passing through several checkpoints guarded by Korthak's soldiers. "We should head back and report what we've found," Turner suggested. "The Admiral will want this information for planning the main assault." But Katie had spotted something interesting. One of the air vents from the lower levels was large enough for a person to crawl through, and it led directly to the fortress power station. If someone could get inside and sabotage the main power systems, the entire facility would be vulnerable. "Alex, what if we could shut down their shields and weapons from inside? The main assault would be much easier if we could eliminate their defenses first." Turner looked skeptical. "That's not what we came here to do, Katie. Our orders were to gather intelligence and return. But think about how many Alliance soldiers would die trying to assault this place with full defenses. If we can weaken them from inside, we could save hundreds of lives." It took some convincing, but Turner finally agreed to attempt the infiltration. They waited until nightfall, then approached the air vent Katie had identified. The opening was barely large enough for them to squeeze through and led into a network of maintenance tunnels that ran throughout the fortress. Moving through the tunnels was slow, difficult work. The air was hot and filled with toxic fumes that would have been deadly to most species. Katie led the way, using her small size to navigate tight spaces, while Turner followed with their equipment and weapons. They reached the power station after several hours of crawling through the tunnel system. The facility was massive, with fusion reactors providing energy for the entire fortress complex. A small team of Korthak technicians monitored the equipment, but they were not expecting any kind of attack. Katie and Turner worked quickly to place explosive charges at critical points in the power system. When detonated, the charges would cause a cascade failure that would shut down everything from life support to defensive weapons. But as they prepared to leave, they were discovered by a Korthak patrol. The alien soldiers were surprised to find humans deep inside their most secure facility, but they reacted quickly to sound the alarm. "Katie, get to the exit. I'll hold them off." Turner positioned himself to block the tunnel while Katie ran toward the way out. But Katie had a different idea. Instead of fleeing, she activated the explosive charges immediately. The power station erupted in a series of explosions that plunged the entire fortress into darkness. Emergency lighting came on, but all the major defensive systems were now offline. In the confusion, Katie and Turner fought their way through the facility toward the main entrance. Without power, the automated defenses were useless, and many of the security doors were sealed shut, trapping groups of enemy soldiers in different sections. They reached the surface just as Alliance attack ships began their assault on the now defenseless fortress. The battle was swift and decisive, with Korthak resistance collapsing quickly without their shields and heavy weapons. Admiral Threnx arrived with the main invasion force and found Katie and Turner waiting outside the fortress entrance. "Lieutenant Williams, I believe your orders were to gather intelligence and return safely." "Yes, sir, but we saw an opportunity to complete the mission more effectively." The Admiral looked at the smoking ruins of the fortress where Alliance troops were now capturing hundreds of enemy soldiers and seizing valuable intelligence. "Your initiative has ended the Korthak presence on Zerion Prime and quite possibly shorten this war by months. The aftermath of the victory was swift. With their main base destroyed and their leadership captured, the remaining Korthak forces on Xerion Prime surrendered within days. The Alliance had won complete control of the planet and its valuable mineral resources. Katie received the Star of Valor in a ceremony attended by representatives from all the major Alliance species. Admiral Thranks personally presented the medal, while praising her courage and tactical brilliance. Lieutenant Katie Williams has demonstrated that true military leadership comes not from size or strength, but from intelligence, courage, and the willingness to sacrifice for others. The Admiral's voice carried across the assembled troops. She has shown that humans bring unique capabilities to our alliance that make us all stronger. But the ceremony that meant the most to Katie came later, when a rescue ship arrived carrying survivors from the Starbound Unity. Among them was her father, Marcus Williams, who had spent weeks in a detention facility after his escape pod was captured by Korthak forces. "Katie, I was so worried about you. When I heard your pod had crashed on Xerion Prime, I thought I would never see you again." Her father hugged her tightly while trying not to cry. "I'm okay, Dad. I learned that humans are tougher than most people think." As they prepared to leave Xerion Prime, Katie looked back at the planet that had changed her life completely. She had arrived as a scared 12-year-old civilian and was leaving as a decorated military officer who had helped win an important victory.